what I want to talk to you about today is about little things, things that are tiny, things that we take for granted, things that you might just maybe walk by and not really notice or think about or think there's a picture there. Let me see if I can make this go. I'm sure it'll come up here shortly. Any minute. Anyway, while we're waiting for that, part of what like I said.
Use a better clicker.
Oh, there we go. I promised you I would deliver. So to me, so much of photography is about noticing what we might walk right past and not really thinking there's a photograph there. For example, something like this. This is a mushroom. It's light passing through a mushroom. Now, you would never know that the inside of a mushroom is that color, but that's actually the inside of a mushroom. It was in the grass. It was something I would go over with my mower. But I thought, well, what happens if you take it and you turn it over and you look through it, push light through it? What happens? This happens. Something different. What happens if you take olive oil and you put it in some water and add a little dish detergent? What happens? Well, it turns out it all kind of congeals and you end up with something like this. Now, I added the color, but the point is it's just olive oil and water. So it's not going to break the bank, but you can do all kinds of creative things with something simple like that. A poinsettia leaf. If you play around with light, if you have a couple of flashlights and you kind of play with them a little bit just to try and bring out the texture, something as simple as a poinsettia plant that you might walk by during the holidays suddenly becomes something interesting. Now, all of this requires one thing: your willingness to see it and just take a minute and look. Like you look around and you say, what would happen if I photographed this? Or a box of pencils. That's all there is to it. Is just the desire to look at something and say, is there a photograph there? A feather. Something you might walk past and say, oh, a bird dropped a feather. But with light, even if it doesn't have to be a big expensive light, it can just be flashlights that you buy at the hardware store and just shaping what it is you have. How about this one? Does anybody know what that is? They're cupcake molds, silicone cupcake molds, but they're translucent, which means that they'll catch light. They'll glow. If you light them from underneath, all of a sudden, something that you can buy off of that online retailer for $5 suddenly becomes a picture with a macro lens. Now, part of what a macro lens does, for those of you who have never worked with a macro lens, it does this magical thing where it smears, that's the negative word, but it gives you this painterly kind of quality to it. A lot of people think that you need all this sharpness, but a lot of what a macro lens does is give you selective sharpness, so you end up with all kinds of interesting parts that are sharp and parts that are not sharp. And I'm not an artist, not at all. But I feel like I can imitate one using a macro lens, because what I'm doing ends up being, I don't know, it renders in a way that nothing else does. How about something like this? These are water droplets on a sheet of glass. The water droplets function sort of like a lens, so it's magnifying what's underneath it. What's underneath it is something you can buy at like a cooking store for a few bucks. It holds holds eggs if you want to boil eggs, so they don't sit on the bottom. It's like a little piece of silicone, but all of a sudden it turns into some weird space age thing. We would walk by these things in the average retailer and say, oh, it's a thing that holds eggs. I try to go in there and I always think I'm going to get arrested, because I'm always taking things and going like this, and I know all the security cameras are looking at me going, what is that guy doing? It's kind of a different, fun way to do photography. So let's talk about some ordinary things. This is a pie server, what you would serve pie with. It's reflective metal, but it's sitting on a tablet, reflecting another image from the tablet with a third tablet behind it providing the background. but it's just a pie server. There's nothing complicated about it. It's just playing with things. For those of you who miss being a child with crayons and having fun and drawing outside the lines, this kind of photography is super fun. And if you don't live in an area, I live in California where it's good weather most of the time. If you don't live in an area like that and you want to work at your kitchen table when it's 30 degrees out, this kind of stuff is really fun. This is just a martini glass tipped over on its side, but it created this shadow that's sort of like reminds me of like a tornado. All that is a single light, like 40 feet away, just creating this nice long shadow. Recognize it? It's a kitchen whisk from the top. But again, remember I mentioned about what a macro lens does? By shooting it wide open, meaning at maximum aperture, the way that the lens renders things like that is you end up with one point that's sharp, and everything else just sort of smears in a beautiful way. And it ends up looking like it's moving, but it's not. It's absolutely still. This is probably the most industrial thing I've ever shot. It's the inside of a dryer hose, like what exhausts your clothes dryer, takes the hot air to the outside. It's just the inside of it with a light at the end coming back at me. It's junk. Let's face it, that's what it is, just junk. But it can be turned into something fun. A colander, like a mesh colander, just some light, and using the light in a way where you're lighting this part of it with one color, this part with another color, the background with a different color. But what's key is using the lens and its performance in such a way to give you something interesting. These out of focus areas called circles of confusion, that's because of the aperture. If you were to stop the lens all the way down, it wouldn't look like that. But the lens renders it that way so you can use it. It's fun experimentation. Just a simple wine glass. This is something where this takes a little bit longer, but it's a different way. You know, we all look at a wine glass all the time, but if you just look at it as its essence, it's just a shape. And so again, the way that there's only one plane of focus right there, and the out of focus parts at the top, it's thinking as a photographer, how do I want this to look? I don't always want everything to be sharp. Again, this is one of those, for those of you that speak French, and I don't, there's a phrase called trompe-l'oeil, which means to fool the eye. This is a different kind of whisk. But can you tell whether you're looking at, is this in the foreground or in the background, the sharp part? It's hard to tell. It's actually in the background. You can tell because this is in front of that one. But the eye thinks it's in the front. Does that make sense? It looks like the in focus part is to the front and not to the back. And it becomes kind of disorienting. This is like a Pyrex measuring cup. We're just looking straight up at the spout, and there's these lines in it that you would never see unless you push light up through it. That's a coffee filter. This is all shiny metal. The color I introduced underneath this glass, and it's reflecting that color, if that makes sense. There's 3 pictures here in a row. They're all of the same subject. It's a glass dish on top of a glass saucer. This is not a very interesting picture. It's a beautiful little dish. I was actually going to throw it away, and then I was like, you know what? There's something else going on inside of this. See this hint of golden color that's in there? I was like, what happens if I get much closer than where I am now? Well, it turns out that's what's in those, that color is inside that dish. But the only way you get there is to look closer with a macro lens. Now, one tip I'll give you is, many of you have been to a jewelry store and you'll see a jeweler will have what they call a jeweler's loop. It's the kind of thing, you know, it might be like 10x. So you can look at a diamond or a precious stone or something like that. That's really handy for something like this, because instead of taking your camera and having to go search around for interesting things, taking something like that helps you find this. And that's the same dish. This time I put the saucer behind it. But the patterns and the shapes and the colors and everything are in the subjects. That's the beauty of this. And once you find them, the more you find these kinds of things, the more you'll find more of them. Meaning, you'll start looking for things. I'm all the time looking at people's things they're wearing and clothes they're wearing, and like, oh, that button would be really interesting. It changes the way you start looking at the world. And if I can make this pitch, it's a more fulfilling way to look at the world. You start seeing much more of what's around you. Coffee drinkers? Come on, people, you're my people. Coffee drink, there we go. This is the bottom of a French press. And so what's happening is this part of it is reflecting a prismatic background. And then the background, which is this part, is also a prismatic. What I mean by that is a background, you can go to any, like a art supply store, and they'll have these backgrounds. Like, I see a purse right there, right behind the monitor. It's kind of like glowing in color. See it? That's prismatic. That would be an awesome background behind half these pictures. But that kind of thing, and when you hit it with a light, it does all kinds of things. And then if you use your lens in such a way to leverage that, you end up with these weird patterns all over the place. It's the great thing, only macro lenses tend to do this because you're at such high magnification. Again, a different colander. This is using selective focus. The only thing in focus is the color. And I did it that way on purpose because I like this, and I like this, all these interesting circles. But it's just a colander, the kind you would put like blueberries in and rinse them under the sink. I pull more stuff out of my kitchen drawers. You know, we're all looking for subjects, and to be honest with you, I don't have the ability to go to Madagascar and find wonderful subjects, so I find them in my kitchen drawers, and I can do it at my kitchen table. Again, this is kind of the fooling the eye bit. It's just a fork, a reflective fork, but I took two backgrounds, the one you see, which is in the back, and the same background reflecting in the fork. So the background is sitting here. I mean, there's one colored piece of paper here and another one behind it, and they match. So it sort of looks like the fork is the same color as the background. Not complicated, it's just two lights and a fork. The hardest part is getting the fork to stay where you want it. Cocktail drinkers, you don't have to raise your hand, it's okay. This is a cocktail strainer, but it's the same thing I showed you earlier. The coils that are sharp right here are actually in the back. You're looking through out of focus coils in the front to see the in focus coils in the back. I'm stressing the same point because I think most of us have been conditioned at some point that you want everything to be sharp. So make sure you have everything sharp. And to me, one of the underappreciated things about lenses today is how good they are wide open and what they do when they're wide open. So half the time I'm shooting with a wide open lens because of how beautiful it looks. And I'll say, you know what, let me try it at f5.6 and f11, and invariably I'll look at it and go, you know what, I like the wide open one better, it's just prettier. Mike mentioned one that he's got hanging, he's got this one hanging. This is a makeup brush. You would not think a makeup brush looks like this, but this is actually at 2-to-1 or twice life size. So it, interesting things start to happen when you get very close. For those of you who are fans of vintage photography, this is like a more than 100-year-old light meter, and I have it in my collection, and I just wanted to make a pretty picture of it. But this is where the challenge comes in, and I encourage all of you to try this. It takes patience to try and get the light so it's only in this area, but not as much here and not at all over here. It takes patience, but it's incredibly satisfying to spend the time to do something like this, and at the end of it say, I got just what I wanted. It took me several hours, but I got into this flow state where I just kept moving closer and closer and closer to what I wanted, and I finally got there. Bubbles just crawling up the inside of a bottle. They're just soap bubbles. If you like to grill, this is a brush that you use to clean a barbecue grill. But again, it's the same thing where you're just focusing on parts of it, not the whole thing. And you get this bleedy quality that is super wonderful, at least it is to my eye. You know when you like go buy a bag of limes at the grocery store and it comes in that little mesh bag? That's the mesh bag. So you can point at me and say, that guy just photographs junk. It's true. I mean, that's what you would throw away. But it becomes this sort of layer. And what does this is that's the out of focus part. The in focus part is this, but the out of focus part is what's in front of it creating that halo. This is a water pitcher, like a fluted glass water pitcher, but I hit it with some color and made the glass sort of do this thing, and then you just shoot part of it. It becomes this sort of abstract, colorful thing. Almost everything, this is an exception, but almost everything I've shown you is no bigger than that. It's all very small, which means you can do it on your kitchen table, you can do it in a basement, you can do it anywhere. You don't need a big giant studio. And you can set it up, and I do this all the time, like you set something up, work on it for a little, and then say, I'm hungry, and you go have a meal, and then you come back, and it's exactly as you left it. Unless it's something living, it'll still be there, and you can keep going. Whereas a sunset, like, oh, I better hurry, because the sun's setting, this isn't going anywhere. And it's almost like therapy. It's fantastic. Different kind of barbecue brush. Same effect, different result. Again, bottles in the neck. This is a soda bottle. You see this all the time. You open the refrigerator and it looks just like that. But if you add a little color behind it and just sort of have a little fun, it's an abstract picture. A different kind of brush. This is a phenomenon that I never get tired of, but I also can't quite wrap my head around it. It looks like it's spinning, but it's not moving at all. It's just what happens when you shoot something wide open. You get this kind of swirly movement. Looks like champagne a little bit, right? It's aloe vera inside of a champagne glass. The idea is I wanted the bubbles and I wanted them to stay there. Originally, I was just going to do the aloe vera bottle, but I thought, oh, it would be better in a pretty glass. I've never had so much trouble getting something out of a glass. I must have worked for hours to clean one single glass to get all the aloe vera out. Same glasses I'm wearing. The interesting thing about this, and this is a little bit technical, but for those of you who enjoy a technical challenge, why is the shadow blue? The glasses are clearly clear. The background looks to be pink. Why is the shadow blue? The reason is I have pink light coming from a distance that's creating the shadow. So the pink light is coming from a distance and creating red in my glasses, red in the background. But the blue, a shadow is nothing, meaning there's no light. It's negative light. So all you have to do is fill the shadow with whatever you want. So I just filled it with a little bit of blue color. If you go too far, the pink and the blue start to mix. But if you don't go too far, it'll just fill the shadow and no more, and you end up with a blue shadow on a red background. So let's talk a little bit about focus stacking. For those of you that are interested in this kind of thing, focus stacking is fantastic because you end up with focus only where you want it and no more. So you can see here like 31 captures. This is the inside of a reflector. There's probably one here. It's just part of the inside of a light reflector that you might use in the studio. A feather. All of things done with focus stacking have this almost hyper-real quality to them. The thing that is kind of a misnomer about focus stacking is people sometimes think it means everything's in focus. That's not at all what it is. You can see here, this is not in focus, but the flower is completely in focus. That's your choice. You can make it, and that's what I chose, is I wanted it to be in focus from the highest point here to the lowest point here, meaning depth-wise. I just wanted to make sure that that was sharp, and the rest of it, I like so it gives me that dimensional quality. Focus stacking gives you a lot of control. If you haven't tried it, let me tell you just a little bit about how it works. So we all know about depth of field. Over there you can see there's a shot of a toothbrush, not the greatest picture in the world, but it's at f4. As we go through the f-stops, watch what happens to the background. More and more the background becomes in focus. We see more and more of the toothbrush becoming in focus. But you'll see by the time I get to the minimum f-stop, see, like at this point, the background's now fighting the toothbrush. It's too sharp. And here, it's really fighting it. But you can see the top bristles are still not sharp. But when you focus stack something, there's my f11. That's what I want. I like that background. When you focus stack something, you can keep your background the way you like it, but at the same time, the entire toothbrush is sharp. So it doesn't mean everything's sharp. It means what you want to be sharp is sharp. Let me show you how it works. Essentially what happens is the camera captures a series of images all focused on a different point of the subject, and then software blends it all together, and it looks like this. The software takes only the parts that are sharp and nothing else. So essentially, for those of you who work in imaging software, it uses masks, and it keeps just the parts that are sharp and no more, and then it blends them all together, and you end up with a sharp image. It's very easy. The key is, this used to be very complicated. Cameras made now, some I can name right off the top, the Z9, the Z8, the Z7 II, the Z7, the D850, and there are some others, will all do this. They won't do the stacking internally, but the capturing can be done internally, and so fast you can't believe it. You can capture 100 pictures in 30 to 40 seconds. It goes as fast as you can. I mean, you turn around and it's done. And then you just drop it into the software and you're done. So I'll show you some more examples of that kind of hyper-real quality. Dandelions. These kinds of things, high magnification where you wouldn't be able to hold the focus in any other way. It gives you this feeling like every little thing is sharp. It's just fantastic. And like I say, it's so easy. And again, it doesn't have to be everything. Here, the stamen, and I'm not an expert in this, but I think that's what that's called. This isn't sharp. I just wanted that to be sharp, but that's still 150 captures to do it. 200 captures. It's just a little feather, maybe about that big. But the curve of the feather means you have to hold all that focus. I wanted the background to be out of focus, but the butterfly or moth, I always get them confused, to be completely in focus. Dragonfly wing. I think that's an iris. It's just this hyper real, but it's all in your control. Different mushroom. This, like the Pi server, this is a spoon on a tablet with a tablet as a background. Sometimes people ask me what my setups look like. That's a good example of the next picture. It looks more complicated than it is. It's not that complicated, but it is fun. Let me talk a little bit about high magnification. High magnification means 1x, 5x, 10x. So for example, to get your head around what this really means, there's a diamond, a ballpoint pen, or a rollerball pen and a pin. There it is at 5x. The previous one was 1x or life size. You can all of a sudden see how much you really see at 1x, 5x, 10x. We're talking very small things. But what happens at those small magnifications, if you look at this part and that part, this is 1x, that's 5x, and that's 10x. It looks almost like, rolling hillside, but it's a butterfly wing. Same thing. Look up here in particular. They look like weapons. It's really beautiful to work at high magnification. Same thing. Look particularly here and up there where that soft looking stuff is. There's the soft looking stuff. It's really beautiful up close at 5x. And at 10x, to me this reminds me of that ribbon candy. But this is only 3 millimeters across. Very small. One of my favorite things to shoot are things related to water. These are cupcake molds, like paper cupcake, flattened out and then magnified by water droplets. You can see them in the background there. That's the background. They're just like this abstract way of doing art. That's the French press again. This is a sink mat, the kind that you'd put in the bottom of a sink so that if you drop a glass, it won't break. This is like a drain cover to keep your rings from sliding off and going down the drain. But it becomes like this otherworldly thing. This is water droplets, and you defocus the lens, take it out of focus, and you get these exploding color patterns. There's the sink drain cover again. That's what I mean. It's just taking the time. It's common stuff, but playing with it in such a way where you say, what would this look like if I did a little experimentation? Same thing, this is bubble wrap, and I've defocused the lens. So instead of being in focus, I've intentionally turned it so it's out of focus, and you end up with these wacky patterns in the water droplet. A juicer, the kind where you take an orange and squeeze the juice, and it's layers of color to make it feel more three-dimensional. This was one of the toughest ones I've ever tried. This is an LED panel, and I've got it on a Lazy Susan, and I'm spinning it. So you're seeing the lights spinning within the water droplet. Same idea, same LED panel, but what I'm doing is sliding it now. Instead of spinning it, it's just sliding back and forth. 2 silicone trivets, the kind you would keep from burning your countertop. I just put them together. You can see them back there. That's what the background is. And then what's sharp is what's in the water droplet. This is really fun. This is oil floating in water. And what happens is like you can actually push these things around, take a needle and kind of push them together and make interesting shapes, add some color underneath, and you end up with stuff like that. They're very tiny, really, really small. But a macro lens really helps you to see this reminds me of like scales on a dinosaur or something like that. But it's all just oil floating in a sea of water. All you need is the water, the oil, and a little dish detergent, and it'll make this happen. To me, it's really fun. And it kind of feels like, inner space, but going to outer space, if that makes sense. But it's, like I say, this is part of, all of us as photographers are always dying to find something else to do. This is something you can do at your kitchen table, in your basement, like I said. But the first step in any of it is look. Look around you, look wherever you go and say, what can I turn into a picture? With that, people always ask me, what do you use to make your pictures? These are my cameras, these are my lenses, that's my light. And thank you very much for the time. Thanks for being here.